Today it's detailing the yard on the Heritage Line. Hi everyone, I'm Martin and welcome back to Donnington Castle Model Railway, and today we are going to be working in the yard on the Heritage Line, adding some detail. Now, I've stayed away from detailing too much of the layout up to this point for two main reasons. One is, with so much work to do all over the layout, I've wanted to focus on the track laying and hard landscaping before getting into too much of the detail. And also I found, to my own cost, with the seafoam trees along the front of the layout here, is that reaching over things when doing major bits of work inevitably results in things getting broken. So I've held off on a lot of the work until now, but the Heritage Line main yard is fairly stable now in terms of the work that's being done, and so I can go back in and add some detail to that without any risk of damaging that with building the rest of the layout. So I'm going to take you back in time to when I started this bit of work, and I'll take you through the whole process of adding all the bits and pieces in there. It's all a mixture of kits and things I've made myself, and plenty of finds from those kind of bargain bins at exhibitions and things like that. So hopefully I'll be able to pull them all together to get to add some detail into the Heritage Line yard and make that bit of layout start to look a little bit better. In this video we're going to be working down at the front of the layout on the yard area on the Heritage Line. And if you do hear any gurgling in any of the videos, it's not my stomach, it is this year's batch of apple juice that's currently fermenting into cider that I have to share the garage with at the moment. So that should be ready for drinking about this time next year. This area is modelled on the idea of a preserved railway having taken over a closed branch line, a small halt station and engine shed. The layout being set in the mid-1970s means that this area would still have a lot of work needing to be done to it, but the volunteers and members of the preserved railway would have put in some work and got some things back up and running. And that's really the look that I'm aiming for in this area. The idea here is to connect the station, the signal box and the engine shed together in a more coherent way, giving a route for passengers to leave the station and head into the village of Speen through the tunnels at the back. We also need some preserved railway equipment here, so we're going to need a water tower, and then adding lots of details to really bring the scene to life. I'm going to be leaving the inside of the engine shed for another day, because we'll need to do lighting, and there's plenty of bits and pieces that can be added in there. And outside in the yard, it'd be nice to add a little bit more interest, so some coal staves to go alongside the ash pans that are already in place here, and then a few objects lying around in the yard. This area in here will get fixed up once the retaining walls made it down there, so that kind of get blended in, and then we need some buffer stops on the end there. I do have some of those old Pico coal bunker sleeper style ones, so I will maybe use those. Now that we know what we're aiming for, let's get stuck in. These are the buffers I was mentioning, and these are actually older than me, and when I say that I don't just mean the tooling, I mean these have been a little box of railway bits ever since I can remember as a child. On other parts of the layout I have DCC Concepts illuminated buffer stops, but I thought as something different I'd use these in the end of the shed. They are an incredibly simple kit to put together. I think it's 5 pieces total, and then I painted them up. I used the technique that you will see shortly on the pallets for the wood, and then on the top some neat PVA, and then I just poured some ballast over the top to give that impression, and then a little bit of dark wash just to make that look a little bit dirty but not too much. Shook the excess ballast off once the glue was dry, and there we go. And to get from where you saw to the finished state, I put the retaining walls in first, then homemade sculptor mould to blend those into the landscape, added the buffer stops in, again used sculptor mould around those, then once that was all dry, painted it brown, and then went over the top with vegetation the way that I usually do. So brown paint, static grass, and then some bushes and shrubs and things like that. And that's how it's turned out. And now you can have a loco just stick its nose out of the shed with the buffer stops. It looks quite cool. Now that the retaining wall is finished, I can start adding some detail into this yard outside of the steam shed. And one of the things I'm going to put up against the wall is some coal staves. So I have some 5mm plywood cut into very short lengths. What I will do is I will use those to build up a little structure, almost like a little lean-to for the coal. So I'll go away and do that and come back in a minute. This is now a selection of those wooden pieces of different lengths put together, glued, and then I've painted a wood effect finish over them. I've matched the size against the space in that arch on the retaining wall, as it feels like the arch would have been there first and then the coal stave built into that space later. Hopefully you can see I've just added a couple of bits of packing foam into there just to mean I don't have to use as much coal when I stack that up. So I'll cover that in glue now and get the coal loaded in. I believe this is Pico coarse coal with some of the fine stuff then poured over the top. This is some footage from about 18 months ago, and I've gone back in time because it shows a little bit clearer where the trap point needs to go on the exit from this siding from the engine shed. There are a few options available. Most of them are quite complicated and involve cutting out a section of track. However, I discovered that the GWR used to use single rail trap points. I think this was a source of much frustration in BR days, but a lot of smaller GWR lines never had their single rail points removed, and particularly as this is a branch line, I thought this might be a good excuse to add one in here. It'll certainly be a lot easier than taking out a section of track. So what I've done is I've grabbed a short section of bullhead track, removed a rail from it, filed down one end so it will sit flush against the other rail. At the other end, I'm going to cut some short sections of sleeper, and the rail is going to sit into those, and hopefully that will give it a bit of curve, which is what would be needed in reality. Here you can see where I've snipped off the ends of the sleepers and then put those new sleepers and that rail in there. I don't think this looks amazing, but I think it's passable for now. I think once there's some sleeper grime over the top of that and the rust colour has been toned down a bit, then I think that will look a bit better. I've also added in some point rodding which would face this direction because technically speaking this rail here is solid and it's this end, it's this rail that gets pulled backwards and forwards, which is why the point rodding is in this side, but I'll get that all connected up. I won't do too much more on this until the rest of the point rodding's in, so I know what I'm dealing with around here. But that does solve that problem of trap points coming out of the engine shed. There are a few different options to choose from when it comes to water towers. I believe there's a Dapol self-assembled water tower, and this is the ratio kit. I picked this up at Hampshire Models in Basingstoke. They're always really helpful in there. And as you can see from the instructions, it's a fairly simple process to build this. Now, when it came to building and painting this, I did that whilst in the middle of the show, and so I didn't film any of the painting. So let's go over and look at the finished model. And here is the water tower kit all finished up. I think it looks okay. I think if I did it again, it might look slightly better, but as a first go, I think that's not too bad. It does, under the camera, look a little bit shiny, but it's quite matte in reality. So I'm quite happy with that. Just followed the kit. I didn't film painting it, really because I thought I wouldn't do a very good job of it. I might need to start filming them because maybe I do a slightly better job than I anticipate I'm going to be doing. The weathering, a combination of things here. First, a little bit of rust paint in places where there's likely to be a bit of water. I think I went over every single rivet with a tiny dot of rusty paint. Then some black washes just streaked down, and also some weathering powders, and then just taken back a little bit to so it's not too grubby. And that's about that. Without nothing really complex. I've done that. And then down here I have some concrete hard standing that's made from 2mm basswood. I can't remember if that was laser cut or just hand cut with a saw and laid in that space there. And those lines you can see on it, I just used the back of a scalpel just to score into them, and then a little bit of black wash in them, and then they give that impression of concrete slabs that have been laid with this been put on the top of. So quite a nice effect without too much effort there. And then you can see a combination of ballast and sand and tiling grout just to give a different sense to some of the paths there. So they looked a little bit different from the ballast. And again, in these tunnels, you can see where I've used that sand and tiling grout mix just to take the edge off that ballast, which looked a little bit coarse. So you've now got this quite nice texture of stones and a slightly smoother surface for those. Along the back here, I've used the same technique as I've used previously, a mixture of soil, that burnt sand that I use in the yard, some ballast, and then some scatters and bushes just to go along there. This is, I believe it's the Will's point levers kit, ground frames kit. That's just been put in there with some rodding, which is quite dark and you can't see very well, because that would be a manually operated point, I feel, rather than being done from the signal box. Some bits for the yard, and obviously some other parts of the layout, but we'll start by putting them in the yard area. So we've got some pallets. These are from Model Railway Bits. If you do see them at an exhibition, I really do recommend going and having a look, because there are lots of cool things to be found, all at very good prices as well. So I highly recommend going and seeing him. And we've got some empty cable drums. I will talk you through painting once I've decided how I'm going to do them. I'm going to do a little bit of research first. And then from West Hill Wagon Works, we have some ground signals. So these are static disc ground signals. As you can see, they come with some stickers. I'm effectively going to paint those black and then use the stickers on them, and I'll figure out which arrows, if any, are going to go on them, and also what position I'm going to have them in. I'm probably going to have them in the... I don't know what position I'm going to have them in. I'll have a think. That's the problem with static display. At some point, it's going to be wrong. But let's get these painted. I'll see how they turn out. So all the photos I've seen online of cable drums and pallets show them all looking wooden, if that's an appropriate term to use. So what I'm going to do is apply lots of different finishes to them, so hopefully none of these items will look exactly the same. The idea is to build up lots of layers on these. And the first layer is the base layer. So I've done some of them in this Tamiya XF10. I don't like Tamiya paints. I don't know why I've got this or where that was from. So we've got 3 items here. And then these are in... This is a Humbrol 118. So these are coming out slightly lighter with the base coat. What I will do once these have dried is really dry brush over the top with different shades of brown and even a dark grey and a light grey. And I will use that to build up layers. And when I've done that, I will come back and I'll show you which colours I've used. Now the lighting isn't great. What you might be able to see is that each of these has had a black wash over the top, and then I've dry brushed on some dark grey acrylic just to give that kind of old and faded appearance. Next step, I think, is going to be some weathering powders, just to add a little bit more interest and colour to them also. I'll come back when I've had a bit of an experiment with that. And here we have some of these items, pallets and things like that put into place. I think I need to find some more bits and pieces for the yard here, but this I think is a good starting point. I also, in the yard here, whilst I like this burnt sand texture in the yard, I want to add a little bit more variation across that because I think it does look a bit samey in places, but that's not a huge priority. These little signs were found in a bargain bin at Hampshire Models. So they've just been painted brown. The bottoms of the posts have been snipped off because they were a bit overscale. And they look quite nice as warning don't cross the railway signs. This warning sign in here and then this one down here, again from that same kit. Just used a laser printer to print off that warning message, stick that on, and those are in place there now. I do have one other set of warning signs to go in here for this crossing. These stopboards are made from cocktail sticks with a small piece of balsa wood on the top and then the stop sign printed out. When it comes to things like advertising signs and posters, I'll look things up online or maybe create them myself in graphics programs and then print them out just on a laser printer. I usually print out a sheet of lots of different sizes and then work out which is the size I'm going to use. Some advertising signs on the wall here. Camp Hobson is a department store in Newbury. Newbury's we've talked on the channel before about, is a furniture, or was a furniture store in Reading, and then a bit of blatant plug for the channel there. I'm thinking about above these tunnels putting a sign for like a to the village sign or something like that over the top of them, just to add another little bit of interest in there. And the area around the signal box, this isn't fully bedded in yet. As you can see, I need to cover the plastic base of the signal box with some material to blend that in, and then I'll do a bit of a better job around there. It's also waiting on the point rodding, and as I've shown before, something like this for the point rodding to disappear under, which then gives a walkway for someone to get past that signal box. And here are our telegraph poles partway through painting. So these are the old Airfix ones, I believe. Now, when I was putting telegraph poles into our Lambourne layout, we had lots of different number of, I guess, pots, I think they are, on the arms. Because it was the end of the line, there were some telegraph poles with literally one arm and one pot on them for one cable. Because I'm going to be running these alongside the heritage line, I'm going to go for a full stack of them here, with the idea being that there are lots of cables being run along them, and there won't be any variation in those, I don't think. They don't look too bad. A little bit of weathering still to do on them, but they're effectively painted a very dark blacky kind of brown, a ceramic-y colour. I think it's buff titanium, picked out the pots. Silvery, chromy kind of colour, chromy colour for the steps, and I would just add some powders over the top of those just to tone everything down a little bit, and then they will go in. I'm not going to put wires on these. I think they look oversized when you do that. Wires on fence posts I'm happy with, but yeah, running wires on these, I think 1, it'll be really fiddly, 2, it'll get in the way, and 3, I think they'll look slightly oversized. One thing just to mention, if you are intending to run wires, think about when your layout is set. In the summer, Telegraph wires really do droop down because of the expansion in them. So my layout's set late summer, so there would be a lot of droop on those. Or have them a bit tauter if you're set in the winter time. According to the research I've done on straight track, telegraph poles were roughly 65 yards apart. Translating to scale, that's about 78 centimetres, which looks quite a long distance when you actually measure that out. So I will probably compress that slightly on straight sections. However, going around corners, the poles will obviously need to be in sight of each other for the wires not to hit the wall. So I've shortened the spacing down around this corner where clearance is a bit tight, and then the gaps are a bit longer down here. I don't have enough painted to finish off, but eventually they will run from that bridge down there around the back of the station, over the line somehow, and then around the back of the signal box. This telegraph pole here is where some of the wires would drop down into the box, and obviously there would then be some wires carrying signals along past that box. So I've kept the same number of pots on each one, because I suspect there would have been quite a number of cables running along this line originally. Okay, I will get those telegraph poles glued in place and the bases covered, and then we'll come back and leave it there for today. And let's do a final sweep along just to see what we've achieved. Still plenty of work to do in detail and touching up, but I'm pleased with the progress that's been made. I'm happy to move on to another part of the layout. I hope you enjoyed seeing the progress that has been made. As you can see, there's still some work to do in that area, but that is dependent on those other projects like the point rodding before we get things too bedded in there. But it's a big difference from where it started, so it's also given me some confidence about the process of starting to add details and the fact that you can really lift the layout just with a few simple details like I've been doing today. So lots of projects to keep going with on the layout. I'm very conscious I need to finish off the tunnel on the southern line so I can get that scenery in place. I need to keep working on the station buildings for the Heritage Line main station and get the last little bit of track laid once I've got a couple of sets of points. So plenty to be getting on with. That means there should be some more videos coming up soon. If you're not already a subscriber and would like to get notified when those videos come out, please do click on the button that will be appearing down there in a second. And there'll be a couple more videos from the channel popping up there as well that you might be interested in. But I will see you on the next video. Thank you very much for watching, and bye for now.